Hello people and welcome. Today we are going to be talking about the Asics Superblast. So what you have here is Asics everyday running shoe with a bit of a twist. It's not like an everyday running shoe like the Nike Pegasus or the Nike Vomero or something like that. Not quite as cushioned also, but you can see that there's loads of stack here. It's a very comfortable shoe and it's turned into one of my favorite shoes in my rotation. Also, if you're looking at one shoe to have for every single run, it's cheap. Well, that's not entirely true. It's cheaper to have one shoe as opposed to having like a shoe rotation. So if you're going to go for one shoe, this might just be it. But at 200 quid, it's not that cheap. Speaking of stats, let's quickly go over it. For a UK size 9, it weighs about 240 grams. For a shoe with this amount of stack, that's pretty damn light. There's a 45.5 stack at the back and 37.5 at the front for a total drop of 8mm. I don't know why they've done halves. Makes no sense to me really, but that's the way they've done it, so what can you do? Those are the stats. It's quite stiff because there's so much stack. There's not a carbon plate in these, but you can, I'm just flexing it now, you can see that it's pretty stiff, but still very light even though there's so much foam. Let's go over why this shoe is a great everyday trainer and the parts that make it up. Firstly, with the upper, you've got this, what Asics call this jaggered material, which is breathable. It's not quite an engineered mesh, but it is very comfortable. And you can, if you can hear that, put it next to my ear. If you can hear that, it's actually ridged. So it gives it extra rigidity. So it's more comfortable and there is a little bit of hardness. It's not too soft and it's got some structure to it. So when you're locking it down, that feels quite good actually. And it feels like a lot of Asics products. It feels really good quality and quite nice. And so you've got your just normal eyelets here along the top, and the tongue has a little bit of cushioning either side here, so it goes either side of the bridge of your foot and it's a little bit more comfortable. It's not overly thick, but it's thick enough and it works quite well. There's, like I say, plenty of loops. You can put in a runner's knot if you want to, and then get a proper lockdown. The heel counter is quite cushioned all around here, all around the top of the shoe and the heel counter. There's a little bit of structure, it's quite thick, and as there's so much cushioning, it's quite comfortable on long runs. And you've got a nice little heel tab there. You can just pull the shoe on nice and quickly if you so wish. Basically, the upper is really nice quality and it is probably a lot more comfortable than a lot of the super shoes with engineered mesh. And I think it performs just as well, to be perfectly honest. And there's no downside to this kind of upper, personally, when you're trying to run a bit faster maybe. And then coming down to the midsole, you have a whopping load of Flight Foam Turbo, and you've got some Flight Foam Blast at the bottom, just a little bit right along the bottom, which is like a bit softer than the Turbo. The actual midsole here, it wraps around the bottom of your foot, and then it kind of wraps around the bottom just inside, and then you've got the insole as well. So you get the picture. It's a Supermax cushion shoe, and so now we move on to the outsole. You can see I will put a little bit of B-roll on there. So you can see there's loads of rubber on the sole and it's nice and wide. If you look at it from the top, then the base is actually wider than the upper. So it gives you loads and loads of stability, and you can land on any part of the shoe and it's going to feel quite stable. And you might think that's quite weird to say, but in the modern era of super shoes, it isn't necessarily like the Adidas Prime X. If you land on it wrong, then you're going to get quite a bit of instability. So, but with this being quite wide, the base is quite wide, well, very wide in fact, you can land on it anywhere and you're going to be totally fine. So say you're like crossing a road or you're changing pace, then you're going to have good stability all the time, even if you land on the heel or any part of the midfoot or the forefoot. That being said, it kind of needs a wide base because of the rubber that they've put on it. And now Asics call this aha rubber. And I don't know whether that's going to be the sound you make as you kind of slightly slip in the wet, because although these are great in the dry, the rubber is not anywhere near as good as, say, the continental rubber you get on Adidas. So even though it's nice and stable, but you got to be careful in the wet. I found it's quite, I'd say it's not bad, but it's just average in the wet, which is not what you need. Of course, it's great in the dry, but you don't need extra grip in the dry, do you? So I think Asics have really missed a bit of a trick here, and I don't know what the other Asics trainers are like. So it's a bit of a shame really that the rubber on this isn't so good, considering the rest of the shoe is pretty damn good, I would say. So Asics have missed a bit of a trick on this one. Maybe the next version will be better, which is apparently is coming out next year, so that's something to look forward to. So what are you going to use this shoe for? Basically, you could use it for anything. Sorry, that's a bit not particularly descriptive, is it? I mean, you could use a pair of green flash for anything, but you know, we're talking about running here, so you don't want to go running in a pair of green flash, do you? Anyway, I digress. So you could use this for your long runs, tempo runs, threshold runs, or even your easy day runs. I've heard people of running marathons in this, which there's plenty of cushioning for marathons, that's for sure. You could even use this to race in if you so choose. I mean, you might not get, you know, ultimate performance compared to like a shoe with a carbon plating, but you'd still have a lot of fun. Even though I've got fair few amount of trainers in my rotation, probably more than I'd care to admit to, I find myself reaching for these shoes more often than not. So it's definitely I'm getting my money's worth so far. I've done probably about 50 miles in this, and there's no sign of wear at all, especially on the rubber. Even though I gave it a bit of a hard time, it does wear quite well. So I would say this shoe will probably stand the test of time, even though trainer technology is moving on quite swiftly and it's moving on all the time. But I think once a good shoe, always a good shoe, and I definitely recommend this shoe if you want one trainer that you can use for all types of runs. You could even use this shoe to race in if you so chose, which wouldn't be a bad option actually. You probably wouldn't get ultimate performance like you would in a carbon shoe, but you'd have a lot of fun in it, and you're more likely to stay injury free because of the amount of cushioning. I mean, every time, this is more my go-to shoe now for most runs, because every time I put it on and I lace it up, it feels great, and it feels like an event, which when you're spending this amount of money, when you put it on, it should feel like that, you know. So you're happy to go out running and more likely to go out running more often. And that about wraps things up. Thanks for watching.